Of all the beloved childhood properties to have changed since the turn of the century, the most emotionally contested has to be Star Wars. Whether it's changes to the original trilogy, a divisive story, or, the subject of this video, alterations to the expanded universe, the galaxy far, far away has often been at the epicenter of online debate. Passions always tend to run high when it comes to the EU, which was expunged from the official Star Wars continuity in 2014, at which point it was then relegated to the Legends bracket. It was an essential move by Disney, and though there have been some unfortunate casualties, the Old Republic and Kyle Katarn will forever be in my heart, it's fair to say that the new EU is tighter, more compelling, and altogether just better than the old mythology. But what changes, instigated since the old continuity vanished, have worked the best? With cloned emperors, weird Sith apprentices, and dozens of awkward depictions to go by, I'm Ewan from What Culture, and here are 8 Star Wars changes made by Disney that were completely justified. Number 8. The formation of the Rebel Alliance. For decades, the formation of the Rebel Alliance was a relatively unexplored thing in the expanded universe. Of course, stories were told that recounted their earliest battles against the Empire, but nothing delved deep into the burgeoning moments of its existence. That was until The Force Unleashed released in 2008. The game was certainly enjoyable, and the overall story was cinematic and exciting, but it didn't seem to gel with the canon as it then existed. Its original premise: in a bid to overthrow the Emperor, Darth Vader begins training a secret apprentice, Galen Marek, who was the son of a Jedi the Sith Lord had previously killed. In order to overthrow his master, Vader instructs his apprentice to raise an alliance to fight against the Empire. Unfortunately for him, it transpires that Vader had been doing his master's bidding all along, and that this plot was to merely get all the rebel conspirators in one room so they could be eliminated in one fell swoop. Marek eventually gives his life so that the Rebel Alliance can live, but it was the kind of story that was almost too important. It made no sense that these events weren't addressed in the original trilogy, but when Disney took another shot at the story with Star Wars Rebels, they didn't make the same mistake. The reasons for the Alliance's creation were more fitting, and with the exception of Ezra, most of the characters involved were more interesting too. Number 7. Obi-Wan's encounters with Darth Maul. Darth Maul ended up being one of the few bright sparks from the Star Wars prequels, but for many years his appearance in The Phantom Menace tends to be considered something of a waste. Here was clearly a brilliant adversary, and yet he was killed off then and there. Not so in the expanded canon. Although this technically qualifies as a Legend of Legends, the EU story Old Wounds did illustrate a showdown between Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine, many years after the Jedi Purge. This would be the first and only occasion where the two would meet outside of The Phantom Menace, but come 2008's Clone Wars TV show, a drastic change was made. Now it was revealed that Maul had survived the encounter with Obi-Wan on Naboo, and that he'd had a brother called Savage Opress. Savage Opress, really? Not really gonna get any more inventive with that name, okay. Anyway, the two united over their hatred of Kenobi, and a great rivalry ensued. Said rivalry was carried over to Star Wars Rebels, where Maul once again tracks Kenobi down to Tatooine. They duel, briefly, but their ending is outstanding and illustrative of one of the few genuinely must-see elements of the new expanded canon. Number 6. Boba Fett is neither alive nor dead. Now, I don't want to dunk on Boba Fett. Everyone loves Boba Fett, but the bounty hunter only appears across the original trilogy for a grand spanking 6 minutes and 32 seconds, and though he did indeed boast a menacing look, it is a little bizarre that the character has been eulogized so much by the Star Wars faithful. It was perhaps that very popularity that resurrected the character in the original expanded universe. It was revealed that the son of Jango became the first living creature to escape the belly of the Sarlacc, and that he then resumed his career as a bounty hunter before returning to Mandalore and leading the warrior planet against the Yuuzhan Vong. It's better if you don't ask, in his later years. As of 2018, however, Fett's fate is still unknown. Presumably, he is still wasting away in the Sarlacc, but the official line from Lucasfilm Story Group is that, quote, Boba Fett is both simultaneously alive and dead in the Sarlacc. Number 5. Chewie's death gets stricken from the record. The death of Chewbacca was something of an infamous event in the old EU canon, and it's because of one simple reason. He gets crushed by a moon. A literal moon. Great. So, how does the event come about? Well, the book revolves around the machinations of the Yuuzhan Vong, again, and eventually it sees Han, his son Anakin, and Chewie travel to a planet called Cern Padal to pick up some cargo. It transpires that the Vong have marked the planet for death, and they plan to destroy it by bringing its orbiting moon crashing down to the surface below. Chewie is left behind, while the Solos and Skywalkers are left to grieve for their beloved comrade. No one should be averse to silliness when it comes to Star Wars. Some would even say it's the bread and butter of the franchise, but Chewie's death in Vector Prime was still controversial even at the time of the book's release. It was just so over the top, and a poor end for one of the most beloved characters in the original trilogy. Number 4. Darth Vader's discovery of Luke Skywalker. One of the best things about seeing the new expanded universe develop has been the way in which it's tackled the prequels. In many ways, they've actually managed to elevate those stories, and one of the best examples of that comes in Star Wars Darth Vader number 6. Written by Kieran Gillen and with art from Salvador Larroca, Darth Vader quickly became one of the most compelling Star Wars books on shelves, focusing on the Emperor's apprentice in the aftermath of the Death Star's destruction between episodes 4 and 5. The 6th issue includes a moment where the Emperor's right-hand man finds out the name of the pilot who destroyed the Death Star, courtesy of the aforementioned Boba Fett, Skywalker. The ensuing panels illustrate just how affected Vader is by the revelation, with flashbacks to Revenge of the Sith, specifically the moment where Padme told Anakin that she was pregnant, and later the scene where Palpatine lied and said that Vader had killed his wife, further enforcing the gravity of the moment. It's a subtle change that completely alters the way Vader conducts himself in The Empire Strikes Back, and a great way of foreshadowing the tension between him and his master. Plus, the series itself, as well as its spin-off, Dr. Aphra, are pretty much perfect and well worth reading if you're looking for an example of how the prequels can work in Disney Star Wars. Just saying. Number 3. Getting rid of Clone Palpatine. For many, this is where the old EU canon just falls apart. Although Return of the Jedi concluded the Emperor's story by having Darth Vader throw him into the depths of the second Death Star without saying a single word, why would he say no? That would be stupid. God, the folks over at Dark Horse Comics decided that it would be a great idea to resurrect the character in 1991. The storyline? Dark Empire, a comic book which detailed the efforts of the New Republic to suppress a resurgent Imperial rebellion, and more specifically, their attempts to resurrect their former leader. Throughout the course of the series, the Emperor is cloned in several different bodies. Luke then literally turns to the dark side and pledges his allegiance to the resurrected Palpatine. If people think the new trilogy repetitively lifts elements from episodes 4 till 6, then they should really read Dark Empire. It renders episode 6's conclusion completely obsolete, makes Luke Skywalker look like an impressionable fool, and is chock full with old EU cliches, with the onus very much on making everything epic to an absurd degree. Number 2. Who stole the Death Star plans? Although Kyle Katarn's absence is the one most felt by Star Wars fans in this new canon, it's difficult to argue that him stealing the plans to the Death Star was a better story than the one seen in Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Katarn was a great character and one who could definitely be brought into the new continuity should Disney be looking for a charming rogue in the mold of Han Solo, but the story of him defecting from the Empire to transmit the Death Star plans was nowhere near as emotional, devastating, or as transformative as the one featured in Gareth Edwards' film. In the original tale, there's no explanation for the structural vulnerability in the weapon's exhaust port, no lovable cast of outsiders, and no menacing Darth Vader cameo. Yes, we're comparing a video game from 1995 to a blockbuster from 2016, but it's still fair to say that Rogue One told a far more satisfying story of how the Rebels gained the Death Star plans than the one told 2 decades prior. Number 1. Everything that happened to Luke after Episode 6. Hey, I know what you're thinking. This guy is going to talk about The Last Jedi, and the comments section will inevitably be a nightmare. And you know what? You're right, I am going there. But please, oh please, take a chill pill and several deep breaths before you go off on one. Before Rian Johnson's film, it's fair to say that Luke Skywalker was fairly one-dimensional. Yes, he was the heir to the greatest pilot the galaxy had ever known, but he was never destined to be anything other than a typical hero, a young farm boy who gets swept up in a rebellion, rescues a princess, and saves the day. To be fair, he didn't need to be anything else, but The Last Jedi goes to great lengths to extract just how the legacy of the Skywalkers would impact Luke, and what the way of the Jedi, or rather Luke's own way, should actually be. In the end, Luke dies on his own terms, at peace and with the knowledge of having saved the lives of his friends. He does this not by needlessly twirling his lightsaber around, or by lifting an AT-AT onto a horde of stormtroopers, but by depriving Kylo of the thing he wants the most, Luke's death by his hand, and with it the knowledge that the most vapid, superficial, and violent aspects of the Force are its true defining traits. Ironically, the old EU paints a picture of Luke that plays into the things Kylo adores the most. Luke dons his father's old armor for a period of time and becomes so powerful that he eventually becomes untouchable. Factor in his eventual turn to the dark side and a fundamental lack of character development, and it becomes clear that the Luke of the old canon was, in truth, really quite boring. He founds a temple, trains a new generation of Jedi, and dares not to question its traditions. He then turns to the dark side himself before turning back once again, and soon becomes the most powerful Force user in the galaxy. But isn't this, not Luke's depiction in Episode 8, what really betrays the character? In truth, the Luke seen in the old expanded universe became a mythic figure, the kind spoken of before Rey meets him, but it's not the Skywalker seen in the original trilogy. That man was a flawed character, and the one presented in the old EU, save for an uninspired turn to the dark side, couldn't be further from that depiction.